Good morning. My name is Stephen, for those of you who do not know me. We are continuing our sermon series in the book of Daniel. And Daniel is a book that is very helpful for us living in a secular city such as Boston, because Daniel and his companions, about 10,000 of them, were carried in captivity, living in exile in a foreign land. So we're talking about 605, 603. That's when Nebuchadnezzar's reign started. He was the king of the powerful empire, the Babylonian Empire. And so you need to understand that there were two kind of, captivities within this Babylonian captivity, living in exile. The first one happened 2 years into this, around 605, 603 BC. And then the other one happened when Jerusalem collapsed in 587. We tend to think that it all happened at one time, but they knew that in order to Babylonize a culture or a nation or a people group, that they needed to take the cultural elites, the artists, the professionals, the most intellectually gifted, skilled people like Daniel and his companions, and that's exactly what they did, and they Babylonized them, secularized them, as it were. And so we're here on chapter 2. Many years ago, when I was living in the United Kingdom, the local estate agent came to me and said, you and your family have 2 weeks to vacate your rental property. I'm like, what? I thought we signed a lease. And I lived in Scotland, and so when I signed the lease and had the conversation with the landlord, he told me, we're talking about some details, and I said, can we get that into a lease? And he told me, my word is my bond. And of course, that's what the Scots say. And I said, yes, but I want it in paper. Okay, let's sign a lease, and so that's what we did. But he was going through a marital dispute with his wife, and so she went to the local estate agent and told him, I want to move back into my home. They were living in Inverness, and I was in St. Andrews, so I want to go back into my home. And so they came to me and said, well, you have to leave. You got 2 weeks to do this. And of course, I think I panicked. And I was concerned. We had 2 young children at the time, and we happened to be in Edinburgh that weekend, and we met a nice, wonderful older couple, and he happened to be a solicitor. So he invited us out for lunch, or we visited his home, I don't recall. And I told him, hey, this is what's going on. They told me that I need to vacate, but we signed the lease. And he said, according to the doctrine of tacit relocation. Right? That was my response to him. I'm like, what? It's some sort of law of the land that they cannot legally tell you to vacate. They have to honor the lease. So I was like emboldened by this. So I went back, and I think it was a Monday or the next day, I went into the estate agency and told them, I know you guys are trying to do this. I feel bad for the couple, but that's not my problem. I've got 2 young kids. I don't want to be displaced. And by the way, according to the doctrine of tacit relocation. And all of a sudden they realized, oh, this American is not as uninformed as typical Americans. And so they thought that they could have their way. Why do I mention that? Because what's going on here is what you call a subgenre of wisdom literature. Daniel, we know that is a prophet, and this is a prophetical book, and there's stuff about apocalyptic stuff in the future. But what's amazing about the book of Daniel is there's a lot of sapiential, a lot of wisdom literature. And the subgenre of the wisdom literature is called a court tale of contests, or court narrative. In other words, you're entering into a trial. For those of you who are in law, if you're attorneys, you're going to be fascinated by the language that you see here, that they're being brought into a trial. Look what it says here, that the king summoned all of the magicians and the astrologers and the enchanters, and they stood before the Nebuchadnezzar like they're on trial. And later on, I think in verse 8 or 9, he says that here is the sentence. See, this is a legal proceeding. And this is what they did. Rather than go to war, military warfare, they would oftentimes bring 2 groups of people like the Babylonian wise men and Daniel and his companions, and they are now in this legal proceeding where they're going to see which God is the true God. It's kind of like what happened with Joseph in the Genesis narrative, or even with 1 Kings chapter 18, where you have Elijah, the prophet of God, who's going up against the prophets of Baal. This happens all the time in ancient Near Eastern literature. And in modern day, it will be like the rules of contest. We involve formal legal proceedings where parties dispute legal rights by defending your case with evidence and with decorum. There'll be features of a notice or evidence or testimony or credibility and even a deadline. You don't do this by this, and then this is the sentence. Now, of course, most of us are not in the field of law, and most of you are not attorneys, and most of you probably never stepped foot in a court. I've always aspired to be an attorney. Yeah, that's my little. I always wanted to study law, and my parents didn't want me to study law. They wanted me to study medicine, right? So I don't know what happened. God won. He called me into ministry, and but I've always why? Because I love that whole scene of litigating and contending and defending for the law and for that which is true, and to present your argument, hopefully not in an obnoxious way, but to be able to prove that your position is right. Now, we might never have experienced this, but we all, on some level, in a non-legal level, have experienced court tales in our relationships, right? When you have dispute with your wife or your husband or your classmate or your roommate or your parents or your children, or we even though you might say, oh, I'm a very introverted person, I don't know what it is, whenever there is a dispute, all of a sudden you become the most articulate litigator of all times, right? So you channel your inner lawyer, and the inner lawyer shows up and defends your righteousness. Of course you're the righteous one. It's never you. And what do? You contend for your position, and you provide all the evidence. I don't know where you had time to gather all this evidence, but you bring out files from the past. Oh, do you remember on December 17th in 1992? Right? Great memory, right? And then you bring all that, and then you start litigating, and you provide all the evidence for the pathologies and the crimes of your opponent, albeit sometimes your spouse. I mean, it doesn't matter. This is what we do. And so what we're finding here, as we're in the presence of a royal court, that there is a riddle, there's a contest, and there's an intellectual rivalry going on between the two different tribes. So the main idea of my passage here is we're looking at the sovereign wisdom in a secular world. We're looking for sovereign wisdom in a secular world. And we're going to look at it three ways. The first, we're going to look at the crisis of a secular worldview. That's in verses 1 through 13. Secondly, we're going to look at the counterculture of spiritual wisdom. That's in verses 14 through 19a. And then the third is the climax of a secret wonder. That's in verses 19b through 23. So we'll look at the first one, the crisis of a secular worldview. Again, we're looking at sovereign wisdom in a secular world. Let me rehearse for you some of what's being narrated here. It says here, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Okay, so far so good. His spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. Now we know, of course, because we live in an anxious generation, that we know what it means to have sleepless nights. We know that many of us, we have insomnia and we're not able to sleep well. And whenever there are concerns, something that we brought into even our own dreams, and we have weird dreams where your mother shows up, and then somebody from work, how did this happen? All of these things happen, and we do that because we know, as much as we want to be in control of our lives, we know that deep inside we're not. There is this gnawing suspicion, a subsidiary awareness of our limitations. But Nebuchadnezzar is the king. There's no one more powerful than Nebuchadnezzar. And yet he was deeply troubled in his spirit, and his sleep left him. So what does he do? Well, he's going to call his council. And the council at that particular time, the cultural elites, were the magicians, the diviners, the sorcerers, the enchanters, and the word here, Chaldeans, right? I mean, Chaldeans, they were kind of part of the southern tribe of people in Babylonia, but that was a fancy word for referring to astrologers. So they're the ones who had studied astrology at the best universities there in Babylonia, and they were the ones who had wisdom. They looked at the stars, and they were able to kind of determine the future. But the problem here is what this passage shows us is there's great amount of anxiety, not only with Nebuchadnezzar, but there's fertility. Did I just say fertility? That's not a word. I meant fragility and futility and failure of the secular worldview. Why? Because when we don't have ultimate answers for the deepest terrors of the heart, then we become anxious. We become insecure. We become afraid. And so the king was troubled. He was stressed. He was anxious. He was haunted by the sense of his own limitation. Even though he knew that he was great, the people who think that they are great are the most insecure. And by the fact, you'll also hear this later on next week in the description of the content of the dream. By the way, that's not the focal point of chapter 2. We always tend to think, the dream and the different empires and the 4 major empires that came after this and all of that. Yeah, that historically happened. But what's really going on here is to emphasize the sovereign wisdom and the providential reigning of God, of the Israelites, who's the God of the universe, over Babylonian and the secular world. And so Nebuchadnezzar knew his limits. Because he will hear, you'll see next week, that Daniel was able to explain the dream to him, and all of this was described, and eventually he knew, this whole thing is crumbling down. It is what the great Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor has said in his monumental book, The Secular Age. He calls this the imminent frame. The imminent frame. This is what the imminent frame means. He's just simply saying we're trapped in our imminent frames. That is, that we are crying out for an answer outside of ourselves which we cannot produce, even though we try to do it. You see the tension? We try to produce and create our own future and our own destiny and our own reality, and we try to identify everything according to our own limited abilities. But of course you're going to have tension there because you know that you're not qualified to do so. So Charles Taylor says that the invisible structure of our secular age, the pervasive cultural backdrop that's shaping our modern life, is this thing he calls an imminent frame. An imminent frame simply says this, that there are modern conditions where life and reality are understood as contained within a natural, humanistic, observable, anti-supernatural frame that is imminent. I can see it. I can touch it. I know what it is. And so Taylor went on to say, you know what that does for you? It creates a buffered self. A buffer self simply means that you have sealed off, you have closed off yourself from that which is transcendent. In the past, most generations and cultures were porous selves. Porous selves. In other words, that we were open to the idea of a transcendent being who is working and living in our lives. But a buffer self, because we're living in an imminent frame, says, no, I've got this under control. But we don't have it under control. Then what is the result? You're anxious all the time. See, so this is you need to understand the irony here. The irony is, what do we say oftentimes? We say, let's be open-minded. But how can you be open-minded and porous to the transcendent when you have a buffer self because you're living in the imminent frame? You follow the logic here? I understand. If I may say this humbly, most people don't think logically. We think intuitionally. Do you remember the great Cartesian dictum which said, René Descartes, who said, cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. But now, according to intuitionism, according to the way we look at the world in our imminent frame, it is, how do we understand this? We say things like, I feel, therefore it's true. I feel, therefore it is true. It is a commitment to self-definition. It is, we don't have a reference to something outside of us. Everything is self-referential. My friends, that's very, very dangerous. And also, it's going to keep you anxious, and I know you don't want to be anxious, so I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you not to be anxious, to be able to have the poise that we'll see in a moment in Daniel. And how do we get that? I've been helped by a book that I've been reading. It just came off the press, literally 7 days ago. And I read it. It's a good book. I actually, there are many Christian books that I read these days that I'm like, oh, I love this book. This one I loved. It's called The Reason for Church by Brad Edwards, right? First-time author. Rarely do you have a first-time author who can be this insightful, but this is what he says. He quotes Philip Rieff, who is a well-known sociologist out of Penn, and he is a post-Freud scholar, right? One of the best, Philip Rieff. And maybe these guys will be able to put up a quote right now on that. No? No? Okay. Well, you told me you'd be able to do it. I was going to make you look good. But here's the quote. In his book, The Triumph of the Therapeutic, right? There you go. And this was written decades ago. The Triumph of the Therapeutic. He writes, religious man was born to be saved. Psychological man is born to be pleased. The difference was established long ago when I believe lost precedence to I feel. The caveat of the therapeutic. And if the therapeutic is to win out, then surely the psychotherapist will be his secular spiritual guide. And this is not a knock on psychotherapists or therapists or counselors for that matter. Not at all. But when we look at therapists like we look at saviors, then it becomes a problem. See, it's the same thing in marriage. If you look to your spouse as your savior, they're just struggling to be your wife or your husband. Never mind. That's a lot of burden you're placing on your husband to be your savior and to save you from all your life's problem because your mama didn't love you. A little too personal? Philip Rieff said, we're trying to reorganize society and our own lives without a sacred center. And therefore, if we have an absence of a sacred center, because we're living in an immanent frame and we're a buffer self, then we're going to replace that sacred center with what? The sacred self. This is a new term. If you're thinking about rugged individualism, we know about it being self-centered, selfish, and looking about our own interests rather than other people's interests. This is a new term that I really like. It's the sacred self. And the sacred self, this is what the sacred self does. It makes a commitment to self-definition, just like Nebuchadnezzar did. Just like all of these astrologers. They say, well, give me a little bit more information, then we'll be able to interpret. Well, wait a minute. I thought you're the astrologers. You're supposed to be able to figure that out. You see, Nebuchadnezzar came and said, hey, can you tell me what my dream is and the interpretation? And you see how they're clever and they respond back to the king and say, oh, hey, oh, king, live forever. Oh, if you can just tell us what the dream is, then we'll give you an interpretation, kind of a generic fortune cookie. Let's read the palm. Something good is going to happen to your very near future. I mean, this could apply to anything in life. So that's what they're trying to do. And Nebuchadnezzar said, no, I'm going to be strict. I'm going to stay firm to what I'm saying here, and you need to tell me. And then they said the same thing. Please tell us your dream, and then we'll give you an interpretation. Now he's getting very, very frustrated. You can tell Nebuchadnezzar is not a person with a whole lot of patience, right? He's not a reasonable person, we can see here. And then he says, oh, you're trying to stall. You're trying to gain time. You're trying to get around all this. But you know what? You're not able to do that. Then what's going to happen? Look what it says here. He says here in verse 9, if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. And then finally, they're saying they had to admit that even though they're living in their immanent frame, they're living in their own secular worldview, that they had to admit, hey, come on, king. No one can know. There's no man in this land, anywhere in the world who can figure this out. And then look at the way they gently, in a passive way, but not trying to get him too upset. They say, for no great and powerful king, you're a great and powerful king, but no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. So he's saying, you're being unreasonable here, king. No one is going to be able to figure this out. But, here it is. They recognize their limits. They said, the thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. That's simply referring to humans or mortal humans or anything on earth. And so what Nebuchadnezzar is trying to tell the astrologers is that you have to tell me, because I'm anxious about something I don't know about the future. And they're saying, well, no one can know the future. That's absurd. How can anyone figure that out? And then everything just remains the same. Nebuchadnezzar is locked and enslaved within his own little locked worldview. The astrologers have no way of getting out of this situation. So where are they going to find hope? Because this is what Richard Niebuhr, in his book, The Nature and Destiny of Man, he wrote, man is insecure, like Nebuchadnezzar and these guys who are afraid. Man is insecure, and he seeks to overcome his insecurity by a will to power, exactly what Nebuchadnezzar is doing. He pretends he is not limited. Let me ask you a question. I know that this is so easily sociologically verifiable, but I'll ask the question anyways. Do you think that you have limits or not? Do you know that you have limitations? Now, you might be brilliant in your field. You might even be a Renaissance person. You're gifted and you're multi-talented. You can do a lot of different things. You're smart at a lot of different things. Do you work under the false assumption that you're fully in control of what's happening in your life? Or you know, of course, ultimately no one is, but I'm doing a pretty good job, better than the person next to me. Do you work under this false assumption? And if you know that you do have limits, then why do you not turn to a sovereign God? Why do you still stay within your immanent frame and try to live your life within your immanent frame? If that's the case, you're being inconsistent to your understanding of your limitations. I'm just trying to help you to be a consistent person, right? If you're going to hold to that worldview, then you should acknowledge that I don't have full control and full access. That's the crisis of a secular worldview. But we see another picture. We see the counterculture of a spiritual wisdom in the person of Daniel and his companions. Let's look here in verses 14, 14 and following. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Even there, God was being gracious. Because remember, the other guys try to buy some time and stall, and Nebuchadnezzar said, "No, you're not doing that. The sentence is here. Here's the decree." But the king granted it. And then verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Verse 19. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Here are some key differences. Okay? The world tells you that there needs to be achievement acquired. Gospel wisdom tells you, no, it's revelation received. The world tells you it's human autonomy. And biblical wisdom tells you, no, it's divine authority. The world tells you this is the response that you should have to crises in your life. Anxiety, panic, fear, insecurity, all the problem emotions you can add to that. Gospel wisdom tells you, no, you can be calm and collected, and you have a whole lot of discretion and poise, wisdom, and peace. The world tells you self-reliance. You're the one who has to read the stars, as it were. And biblical wisdom says humility, what we see in the life of Daniel and his companions. You see, what provided Daniel his poise, the reason why he was, think with me for a moment, there was a death decree out for his life. There's a death warrant for his life. Like, you think you'll be poised if you know that you're going to die tomorrow? How did he have that poise? How was he collected? Look here. Nebuchadnezzar is anxious and he's stressed. We see here with the Chaldeans, they're saying, come on, be reasonable. No one would know except the gods. Come on. And later on, we see with all of the others that there's this kind of fretting. Even when it goes back to Arioch, later on in the chapter, it says, once Daniel came and said, hey, I have the dream and the interpretation, it says that Arioch brought Daniel hastily. Because he knows, I better get this thing in here before the king tells me to start killing people. See, everyone in the picture is stressed but Daniel and his companions. How's that possible? It is because he understood his identity was rooted in standing with God, not rooted in the status that he had in the royal court. Let me ask you, where do you place your source and your foundation and your security and your assurance? In your standing with God or in the status that you have in public opinion, or the status that you have in your workforce, or the status that you have in your industry? Where do you place it? Daniel, even though he was one of the brightest, clearly says that he was far more gifted, he was far more brilliant than all of the other diviners. But yet he had a graceful defiance. He had a winsome persuasion. He had a prudence and discretion, as it says here in verse 14. Ian Duggett, an Old Testament commentator, says, put yourself in Daniel's shoes. Daniel didn't panic because he understood the purpose of God. Even though he didn't clearly understand what it was, he knew what God was going to do. And he realized even though the decree of death was on his head, he knew that this could be a wonderful context where God would be able to display publicly his power. Here's a kind of a parenthetical point of application. Whenever you have challenges, whenever there's opposition, whenever there is affliction, whenever there is uncertainty, whenever there is kind of maybe a division in the workplace, in the home, or whatever, do you try to be the problem solver and the troubleshooter and the one who's going to bring his or her wisdom into the situation and to be the great mediator or the peacemaker? Are you the one who thinks that you can accomplish that? Or are you going to be like Daniel and you plead for mercy? Because look what it says here in verse 18. And told them, Daniel was telling his friends, and told them to seek mercy, where? What's the next word? From the God of heaven. I love prepositions. Okay? No, I truly love prepositions. And look at this one little word here, from. It might seem like a little word, a throwaway word, but it makes all the difference in the world because the other diviners were saying, oh, only the gods could know, but hey, we have no connection to them. But Daniel knew we have a connection to the living God who is the master of the universe. And if we are able to get revelation, disclosure, and an explanation and an interpretation of this dream, then we can plead for mercy from this God of heaven. Because he is the source. He's the source of all things. They didn't live in an imminent frame. Even though they had received the best Babylonian education that they had received, they had to think about it. Technically, they had to study divination, astrology, enchantment, or whatever else they taught, right? Divination 101. But yet, they did not give in to that kind of educational background because we clearly know they're not compromising their theological convictions of being followers of the monotheistic God. But they wanted to display the power of God. That they knew that even though they did not see, they were walking by faith and not by sight. You know, oftentimes, people say, oh, you see, this is the thing. You're weak people, like intellectually weak, you Christians, religious people. So you need to kind of have a crutch. You need to lean on someone else because you're not able to figure these things on your own. Whoa, wait a minute. Are you suggesting that religious people or Christians are the only ones who have faith assumptions? Oh, of course, I have reason. I said, my friend, everyone has faith assumptions. The issue isn't whether you have reason and I have faith, or I have reason and you have faith. That's not the issue here. Everyone has faith assumptions. The question is, the difference is, what is the object of our faith? For you, you're relying upon the stars. With you, you're relying upon your savviness. With you, you're relying upon your competency. But with me, I have a living God who's supernatural and transcendent. I don't live in an imminent frame. And Daniel clearly understood this. But at the same time, living distinctively as somebody who did not compromise on the one hand, but he did not he did not assimilate. He did not assimilate on the one hand, but he did not under-contextualize on the other hand. In other words, he did not disdain the world, say, oh, I hate the world, I hate culture, I hate Babylon. But on the other hand, he did not worship it either. Let me ask you, you think those are the only two choices that you have? To either hate Boston or to worship Boston? Those aren't the only two options, my friends. See, as Christians, we're called to live distinctively in a secular world. Boston is our Babylon, but God has placed us here. He wants us to live in it, but not be of it. How do we do that? Well, we have to do it by being the people who are absolutely certain, but also having flexibility. How do we do that? That means we are saved by grace. That means that we are saved, which means that we can have absolute certainty. Our salvation, redemption, and rescue did not come from ourselves. We didn't create it. It came from outside of us because we live in a transcendent frame. But on the other hand, it was by grace, and therefore we should never think that we're more righteous or better than other people, and that gives us the greatest level and ability to be tolerant to a world that we might disagree with, and that we will not disdain people even though we absolutely disagree with their worldview. See, this is what this city needs. The city needs people who can be absolutely certain, that is, people who are confident in the convictions of what Scripture teaches, but on the other hand, be the most humble, and the ones who can be the ones who are the greatest servants in our city. We're called to be spiritually bicultural. We are residents and citizens of another commonwealth, that is heaven, Philippians 1. But at the same time, as Peter says, that we are sojourners, that we are resident aliens, that we live here, that we have rental property. Do not get too comfortable living here. This is not ultimately your home. So we don't want to say, oh, I'm gonna live in this little bubble and make sure that I only have Christian friends and I never want to be polluted by the world. Of course, you have to guard your heart from not being polluted by the world, but we are called to engage the world. How are we going to be able to be a light in a dark place if we're not in the dark place? And the biblical wisdom is given to us. The poise, the calmness, the discretion, the prudence, a posture that Daniel had, that he did not over-contextualize and he did not under-adapt. He was living in the world, not compromising, but at the same time fully engaged. So he comes and says to Arioch, oh, hey, what's going on here? And Arioch makes the matter known to him. And then he says, oh, can I request an appointed time to see the king? Goes in, gets the permission from the king, and then he comes back and he realizes that he doesn't live in isolation, so he goes to his buddies and says, we have to pray. We have to plead for the mercy of God, that he will, a mercy of God of heaven, not of the earth, that was talked about earlier, not mere flesh, not mere mortals, not mere humans, but someone who is outside of our frame, that we might be the ones who can be the greatest citizens here on earth. Then thirdly, how can we understand sovereign wisdom in a secular world? Thirdly, the climax of a secret wonder. Let's look here in verses 19b and following. Let's read from 19. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. You know the word, these are 4 different words in the Hebrew, but to tell, to show, to make known, to reveal. 17 times in our passage here, in verses 1 through 23. Made known, revealed. The mystery was revealed. Oh, can you tell me the dream? Or you need to show me the interpretation. And then the rest of chapter 2, 14 times those verbs are used again. So altogether, 31 times. I don't know how many verses there are. In other words, you think the author is trying to say, this is pretty important. It is important. Because we all live in the darkness. How many of you know what's going to happen 1 hour from now? I mean, you can predict, you can possibly calculate. How many of you know what's going to happen tomorrow? Tomorrow's Monday, right? What's going to happen tomorrow? Well, you might know it's like, oh, okay, it's a state or national holiday, so I know I'm not working. All right, okay, so we figured all that out. But outside of that, what's going to happen to you? In other words, we don't know. We don't have provideo. We don't have providence. We cannot look, we don't have foreknowledge to look into the future. We can't look into it and be like, oh, that's what's going to happen. Therefore, I'm going to make these decisions according to that because this person from the workplace is going to come to me and say what she normally says. So I'm going to respond this way. I'm going to be prepared for that. You do not know. You do not know. But the climax of the secret wonder is this. That which is unknown, that which is hidden, that which hasn't been fully revealed. Well, guess what? That's going to be made known. That's going to be revealed to you. The word that the Hebrews 2, did I say Hebrews? Daniel 2 uses, it's not even Hebrew, this is Aramaic, a form of Hebrew. Anyway, the point is, he uses the word mystery. The word mystery is used multiple times in the Old Testament, every single time in the book of Daniel, but many times in the New Testament. And what is this talking about? The true mystery is revealed to us, not through some sort of interpretation. The Hebrews will call this a pesher, an interpretation of the so-called mystical mystery or the dream or the riddle. No, look what it says. Remember they said, hey, no one except the gods will know this. And the gods don't dwell with human mortals. But within God's divine, sovereign, spiritual wisdom, what does he do? He comes and dwells with the mortals. Not only does he come dwelling with the mortals, but he comes through the incarnation in the person of Jesus Christ as wisdom incarnate who comes in the flesh. Go figure. That's how God would do this? How do I know this? Okay, let's go first of all to Isaiah 11. Can we go to Isaiah 11? There you go. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. Now, in our passage in Daniel 2, these are the words that are used in combination. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, mystery, and oftentimes made known or revealed. Right? Those words, all those words are right here. And this is referring to the righteous branch. This is referring to the stump of Jesse. This is referring to the root of David. This is referring to the messianic figure who is Jesus, and is saying that all of those things, the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him with these qualities. And now the author of Daniel is saying that these are the things that will be revealed. Let me be even more explicitly clear. Go to Colossians 2, verses 2 through 3. That their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding and the knowledge of God's mystery, here it is, which is Christ. Oh my goodness. The mystery of God that has been talked about, veiled, hidden in the Old Testament, has now been made known and revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. He is the mystery revealed, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. What does this mean? This means that Jesus, as it says in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and what? Dwelt among us, literally tabernacled among us. It's saying that just as they said, oh no, God can dwell and tabernacle among us. And what the Bible writers are saying is, no, this God can. This God comes and he dwells with the lowly in heart. Isaiah 57:15 somewhere. He comes and spends time with the brokenhearted. As a matter of fact, the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jesus, will dwell in the hearts of these broken and lowly sinners and fallen people who struggle to live in the imminent frame. This is the beautiful message and the mystery revealed that is by sheer grace. You know, many years ago when my youngest daughter, she was like 6 or 7, you know, I'd go on these speaking engagements, and she'd comment. Every time before I went there, she would write me a note. She must have written me, I don't know, 200 letters. And of course, you know, after a while, she stopped getting creative, right? She's just recycling the same words. I said, come on, honey, be a little creative. And then she'd always leave a note for me. So I have to write one back and leave it right underneath somewhere where she could find it and leave. So I did that. But this time around, she wanted something a little bit more. So she went to my wife and said, Mommy, I really miss Daddy this time. Can I sleep in your bed just for these few days so that I can smell his pillow and smell his scent? So I can sense as though Daddy's near to me. I know you might think that's a little gross, but for a 6-year-old girl loving her daddy's scent, that's a beautiful thing, right? And so my wife, and this for some of you who are young parents, do not do this. This is not good. It was a policy within our family. We do not let children sleep in our beds. No, they can cry it out in your room. That's your crib. But this one time, my wife was being gracious, right? Not giving her what she deserved, and allowed her to sleep there. And so she's sleeping on there every night, probably appreciating my scent. Several days later, I come home, and I open the front door of my home, and she's waiting there. I'd say, honey, come here, Daddy's here. Give me a big hug. What if she said, Daddy, it's okay. It's okay. I have your pillow. I have your scent. And holding on to my pillow. No, the scent is perfectly fine to me. I'd be like, why would you want the dream when you have the mystery revealed? See, why would you want the shadow when you have the body that's casting the shadow in the reality, Colossians 2? Why would you want the mere echo when you can have the sound of music? I just saw that this week. I love that. Why would you want the echo when you have the vocalist, you have the singer, you have the person, the one gifted musical theater on stage, thinking what Maria singing the song sounded? Why would I want just an echo of it? Why would I want to just know about the knowledge of the sweetness of honey rather than tasting the sweetness of honey? Why would I want just the smell rather than the flower itself? This is what C.S. Lewis writes in Mind Awake. He's saying, you had the real thing. Why are you going after counterfeit things? If you have the transcendent sovereign God who knows what's in the future, he knows what's in the darkness, and guess what? In the darkness, he brings light because Jesus is the light of the world. He brings light. He dwells. It's a different verb here in the Hebrew, but the same sense as we saw earlier on, where this God doesn't dwell with human mortals. No, this God does dwell, and he comes in human form, and he dwells, and he comes as the form of light. And he didn't just simply come to courageously save his friends at the risk of his life. He came courageously to rescue enemies at the cost of his life. If that's what the greater Daniel, if this is what the great revealer, if this is the embodied fulfillment, revealed mystery, which is Christ, if that's who he is, then why do you want to continue living in your imminent frame? I want to be like John the Baptist. When the Jewish priests and the scribes came, sent by the Jewish authorities, and they said, hey, who are you? I love his answer, and say this to yourself every day. I am not the Messiah. I love that. I am not the Messiah. I am not the Christ. I don't know exactly what I am, but the one thing I do know, I am not the Messiah. Don't pursue the sacred self. It will betray you. You will view everything as in a therapeutic way. You will view everyone as an enemy, everyone who's trying to harm you. You'll never be able to have deep community with people because you can't allow people to speak the truth in love to you. That kind of rugged individualism has no place in the church. But somebody who can be honest. Other people who will be transparent and because they love you, they can speak the truth in love to you and saying, I'm going to say something hard here, but I say this because I love you. Don't just kind of come and go once in a while to church, being somewhat quasi-committed. You believe in the mystery revealed. He came in the form of human flesh, in the incarnation. He made life and rescue and deliverance available for you and me. Why did he do that? He didn't need to do that, but he knew there was no other way. Stop trying to interpret your life through the lens of your anxiety or your imminent frame or the secular worldview, but look at life through the lens of sovereign spiritual wisdom, the mystery revealed, who is Christ. And every time that you do that, you will plead for his mercy. You will pray to him. You won't take credit. You will be concerned about other people's interests before your own. And you will be able to have a posture where you don't disdain the world, but you won't worship the world. You'll be able to love and to serve this great Babylon of a city called Boston.